another fairy story prepped for such an occasion. And I wasn't actually going to tell this story. I was going to summarise the Stoorworm story, but I might as well just tell the bloody thing. So, now there was once a farmer who lived on a fine wee farm called Leaguer. And he lived there with his wife and his 7 sons, and they all worked hard in the fields. Well, that wasn't strictly true. The parents and the 6 eldest boys worked hard on the farm, but the youngest did nothing but lie by the side of the fire, raking through the ashes, until he was completely covered with ashes, and whenever he went out, the ash would blow off him like smoke for a bonfire, and they called him Assy Paddle, which just means somebody that paddles about, rakes about in the ashes. And his parents would stand down and shake their head and say, boy, 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 as we do sometimes. And the sons would give him a kick on the way out and say, out the way, Assy Paddle. They hated him. Now, a terrible thing happened, because at the land where Assy Paddle lived, the Stoorworm arrived. And this wasn't any old Stoorworm. This was the Mucklemester Stoorworm. An interesting name, because the Orm part, worm, means a serpent. This was a giant sea serpent. They said it was the father of all the Stoorworms in the sea. And the name Muckle was Scottish for big, Mester was Orkney dialect for big, and Stoor was Old Norse for big. So it was the big, big, big one. It was so big that it was curled right around the earth, and whenever it moved, it caused tidal waves and earthquakes. And its breath was poisonous to anything that breathed it. It would blight crops. And it had turned up at the shore, and it had started to yawn, which was a bad sign. Because it didn't mean it was sleepy, it meant it was hungry, and it needed to be fed. So, the king called all his advisors around, and they were less than useless. But one of them came up with the idea of, why don't we get the Spayman? Now, a Spayman was like an equivalent of a wizard, I suppose, a wise man, a man that knew a thing or two. And so the Spayman was brought down, and he said, Your Majesty, the Stoorworm is old now. He's travelled all over the world, and he's eaten all sorts of exotic peoples from many lands. But in his old age, he's developed a bit of a sweet tooth. So if you were to feed him 7 maidens every Saturday morning for his breakfast, then he would leave the land alone and not destroy it. So every Saturday morning, 7 poor maidens were bound hand and foot, and they were put on a rock by the shore, and the Stoorworm would wake up and he would yawn 7 great yawns. And at the end of his 7th yawn, he would flick out his huge forked tongue, and he would pick up the maidens one by one and munch them down like sweeties. Now one day when he was having his breakfast, Assy Paddle and the family were down there looking at this, and it was a horrible sight. And they were saying, the old man was saying, this is terrible, because there won't be any maidens left in the land, and who will my sons marry? There will be no children after them. Who will look after us when we are old? And Assy Paddle said, well, I would fight and kill the Stoorworm. And his brothers just chucked stones at him and kicked him and drove him off. Now, time passed, and more maidens were fed to the monster. And it was decided that the Spayman had to be brought back again, because people had had enough of this. And he said, is there anything that you can do that will be rid of this monster for once and for all? Not just shut it up for a week, but get rid of it. And he said, well, there is one thing, but it is so dreadful, it's so terrible. that I can hardly bring myself to say it. The king ordered him. He said, I am your monarch, you will tell me what this thing is. And he said, well, if you were to feed him the most loveliest maiden in all the land, your daughter, the Princess Jem the Lovely, then it would go away and it would not destroy the land, it would leave. And all the people said, you can't do that, that's too high a price to pay. She's your only child, she's the heir to the throne. And he said, yes, but it's only right that my daughter should die to save her people. We are descended from the god Odin himself, and it is only right that she should give up her life for her people. But, he said, I would crave one indulgence. If a brave knight could be found who would fight and kill the Stoorworm, I would give him my magic sword, Sickersnapper, a sword that was a gift to my ancestor from the god Odin himself. I would also give him my kingdom and my daughter's hand in marriage. Well, as soon as the proclamation went out, 36 brave knights rode into town. When the first 12 caught sight of the Stoorworm and saw just how big he was, they rode into town, right through the town, out the other end of the town, and ran off home and hid. The other 12 fainted and had to be carried out boot first on a stretcher. The other 12 just took one look at it and went up to the castle and said, do you have a wine cellar in this house? No, it's down there. Why? They just sat there drinking and looking morose and miserable. And the old king was disgusted because the blood of an older and more noble race flowed through his veins. And he said, prepare a boat, fetch me my sword, Sickersnapper. I will fight the monster in the morning and die if I must to try to save my daughter. So it was arranged. And everybody was talking about this. The king was going to fight the monster. And back at Liga, Asipatel's parents were talking about this. They were lying in their bed. Asipat was lying by the side of the fire as usual, and he was listening to what was going on. And the old man was saying, right, tomorrow we'll go and we'll go down and see the monster. King fighting the Stoorworm. We can ride on my horse, Sickersnapper. That's the sword. My horse, Teetgum, which is the fastest horse in the land. Said the old woman. What do you mean? She said, well, I'm not happy with you. Why? What have I done? You're keeping a secret from me, and it's not right. You know, a man should not have any secrets from his wife. Isn't that right, dear? Yeah, my wife says that's true. So, you should never have a secret. And he goes, I have no secrets from you, my dear. And he said, well, you do. That horse of yours, Teetgum, the fastest horse in the land. He said, yeah. What is it that makes that horse run so fast? You don't need to know that. He said, why? Well, you know, it's kind of it's sort of a secret. Exactly. And if you have one secret, you might have others. Well, they argued back and forth for a while, and in the end he said, okay, I'll tell you. When I want the horse to stand perfectly still, I give him a clap on the left shoulder. If I want him to run fast, I give him a clap on the right shoulder. And if I want him to run as fast as the wind, I blow through a goose's trapple. And a trapple is the windpipe from a goose from its neck. He said, I always keep one in my jacket pocket for emergencies. As soon as he hears that, he will run as fast as the wind. You see, the name Teetgum in Orkney dialect was a sudden gust of wind. The horse could run as fast as the wind, and so it was named after the wind itself. Well, when the old woman heard that, she was happy, and the two of them were soon snoring away, fast asleep. Asiepatel, who had been listening to all this, he got up from inside the fire and he went over to his father's jacket and he took the goose's tackle out of it. And he headed off out to the stable, and when the horse seen him coming, it started to neigh and rear and kick. But he gave it a pat on the left shoulder and it stood perfectly still. He climbed on its back and he gave it a pat on the right shoulder, and it ran out the door, and as it did so, it let out a loud neigh, which woke up the old man and his sons, and they ran outside shouting, "Stop, thief!" They didn't know it was Asiepatel. And they got horses and they started the chase, and the old man was catching up with the horse, and he shouted out, "Hi, hi, ho, Teet Gong, whoa!" And Teet Gong stopped dead in its tracks. But Asiepatel pulled out the goose's tackle and he blew through it, and as soon as the horse heard that, it pricked up its ears and it went like an arrow from a bow, disappeared over the hillside and was gone. Now they rode through the night until in the end he came to a great big bay, and in the bay there was a great big island, but it wasn't an island, it was the Stoorworm's head. He went down to a house where an old woman lived. She was lying in a bed, sound asleep, with a cat cuddled up at her feet. And the fire had been rested for the night. Now in those days it was considered bad luck to let your fire go out. The luck of the house depended on the hearth. And it was also bad luck to lend fire, because the luck of your house could leave with that flame. So people rested the fire, they damped it down with damp peat so that it just glowed away and smouldered all night. And then in the morning you could give it a puff with the bellows and it would, put some dry peats on it, and away it would go again. So he went over to the fire, he took a pair of tongs and an iron pot that was sitting there, and he took a glowing peat out of the fire and he put it in the pot. And then he headed off down to the beach, where the king's guard was standing in the boat, and he was freezing. He was doing something which my mother came from Wesley used to call bit and flux. I don't know if you've heard of bit and flux. It's when you go like this, you try to get some warmth back in you, get the circulation going. And he was clapping away, and he was stamping his feet. And Asiepatel said, "Aye, quite like the day." And he said, "Cold." "Well, I'll tell you," he said, "I was just going to build a little fire for myself here and boil up some limpets for my breakfast. Would you like to come and have a warm by the fire?" "I'd love to," he says, "but I can't leave this boat. The king's temperament, he would batter me if I left my post." "Ah, well, you better not do that," he says. "It's better a whole skin than a sack full of sore bones." And he started to dig into the ground a little bit, like he was going to make a small hearth for his fire. And he shouted, "Gold! Look, there's gold here!" As soon as the guard had that, it was like gold. So he ran out the boat, pushed Asiepatel on one side and started digging in the dirt like a dog. And not like dogs. Yeah. So he's digging away like mad. Asiepatel picks up his pot with the peat in it, ran out, jumped in the boat, cast off the rope, hoisted the sail, and he was sailing across the bay when the king and his men arrived. And the king was not best pleased. Now, as he was heading over towards the Stoorworm, the sun started to rise, and he started to yawn, the first of his 7 great yawns of the morning. Asiepatel positioned his boat in front of the mouth so that when he yawned again, the water that cascaded down the monster's throat brought Asiepatel and his boat right into his mouth and right down its throat. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the internal plumbing of a Stoorworm, so I'll tell you. There was just one big long tunnel that ran right the way through it, but every now and again there was a wee tunnel that went off this way and went off that way, and some water gurgled down there and some went down there, until the water got shallower and shallower and the boat grounded. Asipattle chomped out with his pot, and you could see what he was doing because the inside of the Stoorworm glowed with a green phosphorescent glow. We called it the miracles in Orkney. It's when you had fish drying above the fire and you could see the phosphorescent, the green phosphorescence on the fish. The inside of the monster was like that. And he ran and he ran and he better ran until he found what he was looking for. The Stoorworm's liver. Now, at this time of year, my liver is a bit inflamed as well. Not sure why, but storytelling festivals always kind of have this effect. Imagine what the Stoorworm's liver was like. It was full of oil, of course. I mean, you all know about cod liver oil capsules and such like, you know, there's lots of oil in a fish's liver. So imagine the amount of oil in a Stoorworm's liver. Now, Asipattle took his knife out and he cut a hole in the liver and he put the pit in the liver. And he blew and he blew and he better blew until the liver caught fire. The oil started to splutter in flames and boil. Now he ran back to his boat. Meanwhile, the king was having a really bad day. He had to get up really, really early in the morning, which, I mean, I'm not a morning person, and so that would put me in a bad mood for the rest of the day anyway, and get up that early. And then he had to fight the monster and face almost certain death, you know. And then he arrives at the place just in time to see some idiot stealing his boat, sailing across the bay and getting swallowed by the monster. Oh, brilliant. Oh, it just doesn't get any better than that, does it? So he's stomping around in a mood. And one of his men says, Your Majesty, what? I've never seen the Stoorworm do that before. Do what? Well, he's sort of, you know, he's kind of, he's sort of smoking. Smoking? What do you mean? He goes, well, look. And sure enough, there was black smoke coming out his nostrils and out his mouth. And the Stoorworm was starting to feel ill. He was thinking that last maiden maybe didn't agree with him, you know. And he started to feel sick. And he retched and he brought up all the water that was inside him, came cascading up a great wave. And on top of it was the boat with Asipattle in it. And they ran up the hillside, all the king's men and the horses, and the old woman and the cat from the house, all ran up the hill. And the boat was cast up high and dry next to them. Now the Stoorworm's days was numbered. The smoke that billowed out of it blackened the sky, it turned the rising sun, turned the day into night. And in its pain it shot out its huge forked tongue, and it caught hold of the moon. And they said it would have pulled the moon out of the sky, but luckily it was a new moon, so it was only a crescent. And the fork of the tongue slipped over the horn of the moon, and it came down to earth with a whack. And it made a huge hole in the surface of the earth, and water flowed into the hole. And it cut off the land of Denmark from Norway and Sweden. And if you look at a map these days, they call it the Baltic Sea now. And Finland is actually made from the shape of the forks of the Stoorworm's tongue. We've got a Finnish person in the audience. So that was that. But then in its pain, it writhed up high into the air and it came down with a crash. And some of its teeth got knocked out into the sea, and that made the Orkney Islands. Again, the head rose and fell. More teeth was cast out, and that made Shetland. And then a third time, more teeth got knocked out, and that made the Faroe Islands. And then it curled up into a tight lump and died. And there it remains to this day. Only we call it Iceland now. And if you go to Iceland, beautiful country, I highly recommend it. You can see the volcanoes there, the flames leaping from the mountains, and boiling water gushing out of the earth, and that is because the Stoorworm's liver is still burning under there. Now the king took Asipart in his arms and he called him son. He strapped his sword, sick a snapper, to the boy's side, and he said, "My lad, my kingdom is yours, as is my daughter, if she will have you." Well, with all that riding through the night, all the ashes had got blown off him, and Jem the Lovely, the princess, looked at him, and you know, he was actually a really good-looking guy under all that ashes. And she fell in love with him, and the two of them were married, and if they're not dead, then they're living yet. Now that is the explanation about why this was called that. This is an old Orkney story. We'll go a bit further north for the next one, up to Faroes. Now there was a man who had married a very beautiful wife, but the thing is, she wasn't just beautiful on the outside, she was beautiful on the inside too. She was kind, generous, thoughtful, always there to help him. And he loved her very much. And they had a daughter. And the daughter was just as beautiful as the mother and just as kind and as thoughtful. But, you know, tragedy strikes when you least expect it. And the woman took ill and she died, leaving her grieving husband and a small child who was only about a year old at the time that her mother died. Now he started to think that, you know, maybe I should look around for another wife because my child needs a mother. And he didn't stop to think that the child needs a mother, but she needs a good mother, not just anybody who happens to be female. So he married a woman who lived in the village, and she was the complete opposite of what his first wife was. She was scrawny and pinched, miserable looking creature, full of spite, full of hate, full of jealousy and greed. And the two of them had another child, a daughter. And this daughter took after her mother in all the bad ways that she could. And the poor eldest daughter, who had been the apple of her father's eye, started to have a life of sheer misery. She was badly treated, she was beaten, she was scolded for everything. Even if it was something that her half-sister had done, she would get the blame. Her life was utterly miserable. She also had to do all the work around the house, and she had to go out every day with her pail and go off to the mountains and milk the cows. Now, as she got older, she grew more and more beautiful, and her stepmother hated her for that. And she thought, I must do something. I must do something to try to ruin her good looks. Because nobody will look at my daughter, they'll only look at her. I'm not having that. So she decided that she would starve the girl. She was accused of doing something that night and sent to bed with no supper. She cried herself to sleep, which was not unusual for her these days. And in the morning, she was sent out to go and milk the cow, and she wasn't given a bite to eat before she left. She went up into the hills and she prayed. She got down on her knees and she prayed to God for help and for somebody to just take pity on her. She also sent up a silent prayer to her mother as well. I wish that I could leave this place and be with you again. My life was so miserable. I would be better if I was dead. Well, she walked a little bit further and she saw that there was a hill. And the hill was open. There was a doorway in it. And inside the hill, there was a table laid with all sorts of delicious food. And she was so hungry, she wanted to go and eat it, but she couldn't because she didn't know who it belonged to. And it would be wrong to steal, no matter how hungry you are. It would be wrong to take someone else's food. But she heard a voice. It was the voice of a woman. And it said in a very gentle voice, it said, "Eat your fill, my dear, eat your fill." So she sat down and she ate food that she'd never tasted before, such delicate treats, things that she'd saw her mother and her half-sister eating, but she never got. So she sat there and she ate and she ate, and then at the end of it, she sent up another prayer in thanks for the kindness that had been done to her. And she said, "Thank you. Thank you for the food." She went home perfectly happy. And as the time passed, and the mother found more and more reasons to not give her anything to eat, she noticed that, if anything, she was putting on a bit of weight. And she was becoming even more beautiful than she had been. And oh, didn't that stick in her stepmother's throat. So it was obvious that she was getting food from somewhere, but where? They had no idea. And her sister nagged her and nagged her and nagged her. "Where were you getting the food from? You must be getting food from somewhere." All you need to know, she said, is that I did not steal it. Well, she nagged her for so long that eventually she said, "Okay, I'll tell you." She told her about the hill and about the feast that was laid out for her. And the next day, the half-sister said, "I want to go to milk the cows today," because she thought, "Why can't I have a feast?" So she didn't have anything to eat. She went off to the hill, to the mountains where the cattle were grazing. And there was the hill with the door standing wide open, and there was the sumptuous feast. And she went in, and she didn't say thank you. She stuffed her face as fast as she could, ate and ate and ate, until in the end she sat back and she barked loudly and then got up and walked out. Never said thank you, never said please, never said anything. Now, she declared when she went home that she was going to go out the next day again and milk the cows. Her stepmother thought this was really weird, and so did her dad, but you know, she was insistent, she was going, so off she went, and she didn't have any supper, she didn't have any breakfast, because she wanted to have a good appetite for the feast that was coming. But when she got to the hill that day, the door was closed. There was no feast for her. And so in the end, she went home in a furious mood, declaring that she would never go to milk another cow as long as she lived. Now, again, the sister was sent out, but when she went there, the hill was open and there was the feast. And she always said a prayer, she always said thank you for the food that she got. Now the stepmother, realising that this plan of hers wasn't working, because there she was, perfectly healthy and happy, and they needed to do, she thought she needed to do something else. Now, the poor girl was just dressed in rags, but the mother would not allow her any other clothes, and her clothes became more and more tattered and torn, until there was barely enough cloth there to cover her. And she would be sent out in all the weathers. It would be freezing cold. She would be out there in these poor tattered rags. And she sat down one day and she wept. She was so cold and so miserable. But she went into the hill and she ate and she said her thanks. But the tears started to flow down her cheeks again. And a voice said to her, a woman's voice, "What is wrong with you, my child?" And she said, "Look at me. Beggars are dressed better than me. And I'm so cold and I have nothing to wear." And the voice said, "Have this." And she looked around and there was a beautiful dress, seeming to be handed to her by an invisible hand. It was blue, a beautiful dark blue dress, and it was embroidered with silver stitching. It was beautiful, glorious. She thanked the person that had given this to her. She wore the dress on, and it was just beautiful. She sat out in the hillside in a beautiful dress, and she thought that this was just the most amazing thing she'd ever seen, the most beautiful thing. Now, the prince of that kingdom happened to be riding by with his men that day. They were out hunting. And he saw this magnificent, beautiful dress in the distance, dark blue with silver run through it. It was like the night sky. And he rode over to see who it was wearing such a beautiful garment. And when he saw the girl, she was so beautiful, he fell head over heels in love with her. And he said, "Will you marry me?" And she said, "No." You don't know me, and I don't know you. But if you come back in a year's time, and if you still want to marry me, you will have to go and ask my father for his permission. But I would be very willing. But give it a year. Make sure that this is what you want, and not just what you desire now. He thought that this was an incredibly wise young woman. And he went off with his men, and she went home. But as soon as her half-sister saw her walking in with that dress on, she screamed in anger, and she tore the dress off her and took it for herself. She was back in her rags again. Now, the year passed, and the king's son, the young prince, he rode up to the farm where she lived with her parents. And when they saw her coming, and when the mother heard her say, heard him say, I should say, "I have come to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage," she immediately took her stepdaughter and locked her in the storeroom of the house. And then she got her own daughter dressed in this beautiful dress and led her out and said, "Here is my daughter." And the prince looked at her and said, "That is not the girl that I saw a year ago. It is the same dress, but it's not the same person." And she said, "Oh, but you see, she's been very ill this last year. She had a terrible disfiguring disease that has left her all thin and scrawny and twisted like this. But oh, it's the same one." And he said, "Well, I did swear that I would come back in a year's time, and I'm a man of my word. I will keep my promise." So he led out the nasty daughter, and he said to her, "Would you swear a holy oath? Would you swear to God that you are the girl that I met a year ago?" And she said, "Yes, I am the girl that you met a year ago." and no sooner had that lies passed her thin lips than she felt herself starting to swell up, and she grew bigger and bigger until she burst. And that was the finish of her. The prince went back into the house with his sword drawn, and he said, "That was not the girl that I met a year ago. You lied to me, and if you want to see the wages of such a lie, you can go out and see what's left of your daughter. But if you don't fetch me that girl, I swear I will kill everyone in this house." So the woman ran off and unlocked the strong room and took out the daughter again. And when the prince saw her, he knew that this was the same girl. And he had brought a lovely dress of gold, which he gave to her, and she dressed in it, and she looked every inch the princess. They went back to the castle where they were married. And after the old king died, then the prince ruled in his stead. And by his side, he had a beautiful queen, who was not only beautiful on the outside, but beautiful and wise on the inside. So on to my fairway story. Welcome back to Orkney for a quick one. The one's up quick. This was a story that was recorded on the island of Rousey. It was collected by a guy called Duncan J. Robertson, who was a lawyer at Kirk. And he passed on to a guy called Andrew Lane, who was producing books of folktales at the time. And Lane described it as being one of the most authentic stories that he had ever had, he had written. And it appears in various collections of Scottish folktales, but also appears in collections of English folktales. Maybe there's a version there too, I don't know. Stories do travel around. Now, there was once, this is starting to sound a bit familiar, there was once a king who had a daughter who was a beautiful, beautiful girl and kind and lovely. But the queen died, leaving this poor girl grieving. Now the king looked around for another wife, and he ended up marrying a woman from the village who was a widow herself, and she had a daughter too, who was about the same age as the king's daughter. Now the king's daughter was called Anne, and this girl's daughter was called Kate. But she wasn't just known as Kate, she was known as Kate Crackernuts, because she would always go out to the trees and gather nuts off them, and she would sit by the side of the fire cracking the nuts and eating them. That's what she liked to do. And she was a lovely girl. She wasn't as beautiful as her stepsister, but she loved her. The two of them were really inseparable. They were great friends. And the queen, the new queen, didn't like this because she was so much prettier than her daughter, and she thought, well, who's going to look at my daughter? So she decided that she would have to do something about it. So she went to see the hen wife. Now the hen wife lived a wee distance from the castle, and she kept the hens that provided eggs for the castle. But, like many hen wives, she was known to be steeped in magic. And she went and told her the problems. She has this daughter. She wants to ruin her look. She wants to make her look hideous. And the hen wife says, well, bring her to me tomorrow morning. Send her here, but she must be fasting. She can't have had anything to eat. So the next day, the queen went and got Anne, woke her up and said, go down to the hen wife and fetch eggs. That was kind of weird because they had servants that did that sort of stuff. But being a good girl, she said, yeah, of course. Took her basket, she went down the back stairs and she was passing the kitchen. And the cook said, you're off so early, I have to go and get eggs. Really? You have servants for that? You must be hungry here. I've just baked some bread. So she gave her a nice bit of bread and a big slab of strawberry jam on it, and she ate that as she was going down the road. She went to the little hut where the hen wife lived and she knocked on the door. And the hen wife said, come in. She went in and said, I've come to fetch eggs for the castle. The room was dark and dank, and there was a fire burning at one end, and it had a pot over it that was bubbling away. And she said, lift the lid and see what you see. So she lifted the lid of the pot, she looked in it, she said, it's just broth. Said the hen wife. Go home and tell your mother to take more care. So she went home with a strange message, and the queen was furious because obviously something had gone wrong. So the next day, she escorted her out the castle herself and made sure that she didn't go and get a bite to eat. She was walking down the road and she met some people who were picking peas. And they said, would you like some peas? And she went, oh, happy peas. Thank you. So she had the peas, she was eating them. She went back to the hen wife's house, left the lid and see what you see, lifted the lid, it's just broth. Go home and tell your mother to be more careful next time. So she went home, passed on the message, and the next day the queen escorted her stepdaughter down to the hen wife's house and made very sure that she did not have anything to eat. She went in the house and the hen wife says to her, lift the lid on the pot and see what you'll see. So she lifted the lid and she looked in the pot, and it was just the broth bubbling away again, but then suddenly a sheep's head rose out of the soup, and her own head fell off, and the sheep's head chomped on her shoulders and stuck. And she had a sheep's head. And she wanted to cry, but all she could do was bleat. So she went home miserable with a sheep's head. And when her sister, Kate Kirk saw this, she wept and she held her sister in her arms, and the two of them cried. She knew that this was her mother. She knew that her mother was not a nice person. And she knew that her sister, who she loved, was not safe in this castle. So she wrapped her head up in bandages so that nobody could see she had a sheep's head. And they left the castle. And they travelled across the kingdom until they left the kingdom, and they travelled across another kingdom and into a third. Now, they found a castle there, and because they were princesses, I mean, where else would they go but a castle? So off they went to the castle, and they asked if there was any chance of getting some work. And they said, well, yeah, we can work in the kitchen. What's wrong with her? She doesn't have leprosy or something, does she? No, it's my sister. She's not well, she's got a sore head. So, well, she says, we can certainly use a help in the kitchen. Now, she worked there for a wee bit, and she noticed that there was something wrong with this castle because the mood in the place was terrible. It was really, really gloom, miserable. Everybody was sad. She said, what's wrong? What's happened to make everybody so miserable? They said, well, it's the prince, isn't it? What? The prince, he's dying. Nobody has any idea what's wrong with him. We've heard that doctors, the best physicians in the land, have been to see him, but can't figure out what is wrong with him. But something seems to happen at night. And nobody is brave enough now to sit with him because he seems to be cursed. Well, said Kate, I'll sit with silver it is. So she sat by the fire, cracking her nuts and eating them. And at the stroke of midnight, the prince's eyes opened and he sat bolt upright in bed, pulled back the blankets, and he ran down the back stairs. And she followed him. And he went to the stable where he got his horse and his hound. And he jumped on the back of the horse, and she jumped up behind him. He didn't even know she was there. And they rode through the green woods. And as they went by, Kate was gathering nuts off the trees, sticking them in her pocket. And they rode until they came to a great big green hill. And in the side of the hill was a door standing wide open. And he shouted, "Open up for the king's son, his horse and his hound." And she said, "And his lady behind him." The hill opened and he rode in, and there was a beautiful room with a dance being held. And a beautiful woman, a terrifyingly beautiful woman. A woman who was beautiful but terrible at the same time. There was a look of ice about her, a cruelty. And she came over and took the young prince by the hand and led him away and started to dance with him. Kate sat by the side of the fire, cracking her nuts and eating them and listening as well, keeping an eye on what's going on here. She heard two fairies talking, because of course this was a fairy mound. And they said, "Ha ha ha, I see she's gotten back again. How long do you think you'll last?" "Maybe a week." "Yeah, I don't think you'll last more than a week. She's dancing them to death, you know. That's what she does. She gets princes, she dances them to death, and she goes and gets another one. That's what she does." So then Kate knew what was happening. And after a while, the dancing stopped. He jumped on his horse. She jumped up behind him, and he rode out of there with his hound, back to the castle, back up the stairs, and back into bed. And she sat by the side of the fire, cracking her nuts and eating it when the king came in the morning. And the king said, "So, did he have a peaceful night?" "Oh yeah, very uneventful," she said. You wouldn't sit with him another night, would you?" "Well, yeah, I would, but it'll cost you a bag of gold coins this time." "Oh, well, yeah, we can do that." So, that was agreed. The next night, the same thing happened. He jumped up at midnight, ran off on his horse. She jumped up behind him, gathered the nuts on the way, went to the hill, opened up for the prince and his horse and his hound, and his lady behind him, she said. And in they went. She was sitting by the fire again, and she saw that there was a little fairy child who was sitting there playing with a wand. And she heard one of the fairies say to the other one, "You know, 3 taps with that wand, and Kate's sister would be as bonny as she ever was." So she rolled nuts across the floor to the fairy child until it dropped the wand and gathered up the nuts. And then she picked up the wand and she put it in her apron pocket. Went back to the castle that night. She went straight to her sister's room and she tapped her on the head 3 times, and the sheep's head fell off and her own beautiful head reappeared back on its shoulders. And she was cured. Now, the next day, again, the king said, "You wouldn't stay with her a third night with him." And she said, "Yeah, but it will cost you." "Well, I'll pay anything." "Well, my price this time is him. I want the prince as my husband." "Certainly," he said. So, the same thing happened that night. Off they went with the horse down to the hill, open up for the prince, his horse and his hound, and his lady behind, and in they went, and the queen of the fairies was dancing them to death again. She sat by the side of the fire, cracking her nuts and eating it, and she was listening to the fairies chattering. And there was that wee fairy child was back there again, and it had a little bird with it, a beautiful little bird. And the one fairy said to the other one, "Little does Kate know, but 3 bites of that bird, and that will cure the prince." So she rolled nuts across the floor, and the wee fairy dropped the bird and started picking up the nuts. She picked up the bird and put it in her apron pocket, and off they went back to the castle. Now she plucked the feathers off the bird, and she made a little spit, and she started to roast it over the fire, and soon the room was full of the smell of this roasting bird. And the prince's eyes opened, and he went, "Oh, if only I could have a bite of that bird." So she took it over to him, and he had a bite. And then he sat up a bit further, and he said, "Oh, if only I had a second bite of that bird." And she gave it to him, and he took a bite. And then he sat bolt upright, and he said, "Oh, if only I had a third bite of that bird." So she gave it to him, and he took the third bite, and the enchantment fell away from him, and he was free of the curse from the Queen of the Fairies. And when the king came in the morning, he was amazed to see the prince and Kate sitting by the side of the fire, and they were both cracking nuts and tossing in the fire. And so Kate married the sick prince, and the sick prince's brother married the sick sister, who now was okay again. And so they married and lived there for the rest of their days in contentment and happiness. Now I'll just fire off one last one. It is almost 3, but we started about 5 minutes past. But I know that it's not that warm, and I know that these seats were not made for comfort. This was your punishment for being sinners, sore bones. So, this is my favourite story. I heard it from a very dear friend of mine who sadly is no longer with us, Lawrence Tullett for Shetland. And he heard it in terms of George P.S. Peterson. And they always said the P.S. stood for Pat Stewart, because that's where he came from. So this is a story for Pat Stewart in Shetland, and it is my favourite. I love this story. Now, there was a woman called Mally, and Mally was married to a man called Robbie, and he was a sailor. He was signed on to ships, and he would sail away, be away all summer, and he'd come back in the winter with enough money to buy meal, flour, to fill a meal gallon, just a big chest that he kept, he'd pack the flour in, and a barrel of pickled herring, salted herring. But one year he didn't come home. She never saw him again. She never knew what happened to Robbie. She knew that he was dead. He would have been home if he could have. But the ship that he was on, maybe it was lost, maybe he died of disease, maybe it was an accident. She had no idea. But he never came back, and she was left with 4 children and no money and no food, and no way of getting any food. They became hungrier and hungrier. The meal gallon was emptied. The herring barrel, the herring was just a memory now. It was long gone. And so one day she had to take a staff in her hand, and she went begging. And she went up to an old woman that lived up on the hillside. And it was well known that this old woman was not short of a bob or two. She had plenty of money, she had plenty of food. Mally knocks at the door. The old woman opens it and says, "What do you want?" "I really wish it hadn't come to this," said Mally, "but my man has been lost at sea, and we are hungry. My children are crying with hunger. Could you see your way clear to giving us a wee bite to eat?" Well, the oldest boy was about 12, so he was peeping in behind the old woman. And there she had a press. I don't know if you know what a press is. We had a press. It was a cupboard where the food was kept. And he looked in there, and there was bread, and there was cheese and butter and jam and hams and puddings, all sorts of things. And he thought, I wonder what we'll get. Yeah, I've got a bread, maybe a slice of ham. Oh, it'd be lovely. And the old woman looked at Mally and she says, "I'm a poor old woman. I can't afford to give anything to the likes of you, and she slammed the door in her face. Marley and the bairns tripped back down the hill sad. The oldest boy, he was trying to put a brave face on it, because he was 12, he was almost a man now, but he couldn't stop those tears from running down his cheeks. And he said to his mother, how could she do that? Did you see what she had in that house? She had all sorts of food. She wouldn't even give us so much as a crust of bread with us starving. Well, son, said Molly, that's just her way. Some people share and some don't. She's one of the ones that doesn't share. It's just her way. But remember this, son, we are better than that. We always share. So they went home, and all she could do was put the bairns to bed in the hope that they would fall asleep and forget about the hunger in their belly for a few hours. And she sat by the side of the peat fire, and she was doing a little bit of sewing, mending some clothes, when there was at the door. Unusual, because in those days people didn't knock on doors. You just opened the door and shouted, hello, and you went. So she went over and opened the door, and there was a tiny wee man. He was no bigger than maybe a 5-year-old, but he was the weirdest looking 5-year-old she'd ever seen. He had long grey hair, and a long grey and straggly beard, and bushy eyebrows, and dark twinkling eyes. And she knew that this was a trow. Trows are the fairy folk in Orkney and Shetland. And she said, can I help you? Oh, I hope so. He says, I've been on the road all day and I'm tired and I'm sore and I'm hungry. Can I come in and spend the night here and have a bite to eat? Oh, she said, you've come to the wrong house, I'm afraid. We don't have any food here, but if you carry on going down the road a couple of miles, there's another house in there. Oh, I couldn't go that far. He said, I couldn't walk another yard. Can I at least stay here the night? Of course you can. She said, come in. So the old man went and sat by the fire, looked around at the wee house, and there on the end of the bed was 4 noses and 4 pairs of eyes staring at him. The bairns were curious as to who this was that had come in, and so they got up, and the old fellow was sitting there, and he goes, you must have some food. I mean, you can't have nothing. She said, well, see what I can do. So she went to the meal gun and opened the lid. And of course all the flour was gone, but there was still some bits of stale crust stuck in the corner. And she started to scrape it down with a knife. And then she got a bundle of feathers and she swept it up into a wee mound. There was cobwebs mixed in with it. There was little bits of wood shavings where she'd been a bit over vigorous with scraping the inside out. And she gathered that together in a wee bowl, and then she went over to the herring barrel. Now the herring was long gone, but she got some salty, fishy flavoured water and poured into it, with sort of fish scales and all, and she stirred it up till it was like a consistency like wallpaper paste. And she very carefully, like it was the most precious substance in the world, because to her it was, she divided it equally into 6 cups. She gave a cup to the trow, she gave one to each of the bairns, and she had one for herself. To say that Trow wasn't impressed was an understatement. He looked at it and he went, what's that stuff? That stuff, she said, is the only food in this house. Yeah, but you'll have some nice, good, strong, home-brewed ale. Oh, no, she said, no. If I had barley, I would make bread with it. I wouldn't waste it on making beer. But we do have a good sweet well, she said. There's plenty of nice fresh water. never touch this stuff. She goes, but well, the one thing that we do have plenty of is peats, the turf that you burn. She says, make yourself warm, pile up, keep that fire going all night. You can sleep in the chair by the fire. So Molly went off to bed and the child curled up in his chair and fell asleep. And in the morning he got up and he thanked him. He was walking over to the door. He stopped and he turned around and he said, you know that stuff that you gave me last night? Mm-hmm. Is that really the only food you had in this house? Yep, she said. That's it. And today we don't even have as much as that. So it takes a very special kind of person to share the last food that they have with a stranger. You have my blessing. So off he went, and Molly said to her eldest boy, go and get a basket full of peats. She said, if we're going to starve to death, we might as well do it in comfort. So off he went, and he came back into the peats. Now, the fire had burnt down quite a bit, so if you put a big slab of peat on it, it wouldn't burn very well. So she decided to snap it in two. So she snapped the peat in half and ding! Something fell on the floor. She looked down and it was a gold coin. She'd never seen a gold coin in her life before. She took another peat and snapped it, ding, another gold coin, and then ding, 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 ding. She brought all the peats. Every peat had a gold coin in it. And she realised then that what the Trow had meant by giving her his blessing. This was a Trow money, or a reward for her generosity. She said to her oldest boy, quick, run down to the shop and get some bread and butter and cheese and ham and some tea and strawberry jam. Oh, do you remember strawberry jam? Just get whatever you want. And he ran down and he came back with a pile of food and they ate like royalty. And they absolutely stuffed themselves. And after that, every time that Molly brought a peat, it had a gold coin in it. Now people started to speculate as to where is she getting all this money from? Because there they were, poor as church mice, 1 minute, and then the next minute they're loaded. How come? Nobody wondered harder than that old woman that lived up the hill. So she went down and spied on them one night and looked through the window and she saw Molly snapping the peat and the gold coin falling down. Ha! That's her game, is it? Trowie money, I bet. Well, don't I deserve Trowie money as well? I mean, I'm a poor old woman. I'm entitled to some of that money too. It's my right. So, that night she waited until the lights went out in Molly's house. And then she went down with a basket on her back and she started to steal Molly's peats. Cart them up the hill to her house, tipped them out on the floor, and then went back for another load. Back and forth she went all night stealing Molly's peats until the sun started to rise and she thought, she'd better stop now because people would see. And then she thought, right, now it's my time to be rich. So she picked up a peat and she snapped and squeak. It wasn't a gold coin that fell out of it, it was a mouse, a live mouse that scuttled off in the corner of the room and she went, a dud. I'll get another one. So she took another one and snapped it and squeak, another mouse ran off and squeak, 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 squeak. Every time she brought a peat, it had a live mouse in it. And they all ran into the corner of the room. And then they had a little discussion. And the one moose that was kind of like self-appointed Yabble moose said, well, I don't know about you, but I'm hungry. What's to eat in this place? Oh, look, there's a press full of bread and cheese and ham and butter and jam and all sorts of things. Ooh. So they swarmed over that press and they ate every morsel of food that she had. When they got fed up, well, when they ran out of food. They started eating holes through her house and in her clothes and everything. It was all nibbled and full of, it was like a Swiss cheese inside that place. It was just full of holes. And the old woman had no money. She had some notes in a wee tin under the bed, but the mice had got into that as well. And it made a lovely bedding. They shredded it, a nice warm bed. But she didn't have anything else, and so she ended up getting a basket and having to get dried grass to stuff in the holes in it, and went down to bed at Marley's. She knocked at the door. Marley's eldest boy opened it, and he's seen her and he says, "What do you want?" "Oh, take pity on a poor old woman." She said, "I'm awful hungry, you see. There's been a terrible plague of mice up at the house. I can't imagine where they came from, but they've eaten everything that I've got, and I've got no food left, and I'm hungry, and could you see your way clear to maybe giving me a wee bite to eat?" And the boy said, "Oh, woman, I'll give you exactly what you gave us when we were in need and went begging. Nothing." And he slammed the door in her face. But Marley was in the corner of the room, and she shook her head and she said, "No, son. Remember what I told you. We are different. We always share." She went over to the door and she called to the old woman and said, "Old woman, come back here." She said, "You can take as much food as you want with you, and I'll make you a promise that as long as I live, you will never go hungry." And I think when we switch the news on these days, and we see the sort of things that humans are doing to each other, I think that we need that story new more than ever before, because that is the way I was brought up, was that you always shared. Thank you. I think that will end the day.